They looked at my gray hair, my worn coat, and my trembling hands holding a ticket I had saved for 11 months to afford, and they laughed. A security guard actually laughed in my face and told me to step aside for the real fans. What happened 40 minutes later made that same man drop his radio on the ground and turn as white as a bedsheet. My name is Patricia. I'm 73 years old. And this is the day I found out that being underestimated is the most dangerous thing you can do to a woman like me. If you believe that respect isn't about how you look or how old you are, hit that like button right now before we go any further. And subscribe because I have more stories like this one, stories about being counted out and coming back swinging. Now tell me in the comments where you're watching this from today. I read every single one of them, and I promise you, knowing people all over the world are sitting with me for this story means more to me than you'll ever know. Let me take you back to the beginning because you need to understand who I was before that gate, before that guard, before any of it. I grew up in a small house with a tin roof that rattled every time it rained. My father worked 2 jobs and my mother cleaned houses on the weekends just so we could keep the lights on. We didn't have much, but we had a black and white television that got exactly 1 channel, and every 4 years that channel showed the World Cup. My father would pull his chair close to the screen, and I would sit on the floor by his feet, and for 90 minutes our little house with the rattling roof felt like the center of the entire universe. I fell in love with the game the way you fall in love with a person, completely, foolishly, and forever. I never played it myself, not really, not competitively. Girls in my town weren't given that chance back then. But I watched. I studied. I learned the rules better than most of the boys who did get to play. And I made a promise to myself, sitting on that floor as a little girl, that one day, I would stand inside a real World Cup stadium and watch a match with my own eyes instead of through a flickering screen. It took me 58 years to keep that promise to myself. I worked as a seamstress for most of my life. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after their father left when they were small. I mended prom dresses and wedding gowns and funeral suits, and I put away a little bit of money every single week into an old coffee tin I kept on the top shelf of my kitchen cabinet. $5 here, $10 there. Some weeks it was nothing at all because the rent came first, the groceries came first, my children's school shoes came first. But that tin never stayed empty for long. By the time I turned 72, that tin held enough for 1 ticket. Not a good seat. Not a luxury box. A single, ordinary, upper-level seat to 1 match of this year's World Cup, in a stadium halfway across the world from the little house where I grew up. My daughter cried when I told her. My son tried to talk me out of traveling alone at my age. But I had waited 58 years, and I was not going to wait 1 day longer. I flew for the first time in my life to get there. I want you to sit with that for a second. 73 years old, and that plane ride was the very first time my feet had ever left the ground. I gripped the armrest so hard my knuckles turned white, and the young man sitting beside me, a stranger I'd never met, held my hand the entire way and told me it was going to be all right. I still think about his kindness. I never got his name. I landed 2 days before the match. I walked the streets around the stadium just to look at it, this enormous bowl of steel and light, and I cried right there on the sidewalk like a foolish old woman, because I could hardly believe I was finally going to walk inside. On the morning of the match, I put on my best dress, the green one with the small white flowers that I had sewn myself 20 years earlier for my niece's graduation. I pinned my late husband's small enamel pin of our home country's flag to my collar, the one he wore to every match he ever watched on television with me before cancer took him 9 years ago. I packed my ticket carefully into my purse along with a photograph of my father, because some part of me wanted him there with me, even if just as a picture folded inside an old leather bag. I arrived 3 hours early. I wanted to savor every single second. That's when it happened. I got to the gate and I handed my ticket to a young security guard, a man who looked to be maybe 30 years old, with broad shoulders and a radio clipped to his chest. He took one look at me, at my gray hair pulled back in a bun, at my simple green dress, at the cane I use for my hip, and he didn't even look at the ticket in his hand. "This can't be right," he said, not to me, but to the guard standing beside him. He said it loud enough for the people in line behind me to hear. "Ma'am, tickets to this section don't go for what you probably paid. Are you sure this is even real?" I felt my whole body go hot with embarrassment. I told him, my voice shaking, that I had bought it myself, that I had saved for nearly a year, that I had flown for the first time in my life to be there. And he smiled, not a kind smile, but the kind of smile people give you when they've already decided you don't matter. Step aside for the real fans, he said. We'll sort this out. He didn't sort anything out. He had another guard walk me to a small holding area beside the gate, a little roped-off corner where I stood for what felt like an eternity, watching thousands of people stream past me into the stadium I had waited 58 years to enter. Families laughing, young people wrapped in flags, children on their fathers' shoulders, and me, standing alone in a rope corral like I was something to be dealt with instead of a woman who had earned her place there fair and square. People in line stared. Some whispered. A few looked away in embarrassment, the way you do when you witness something wrong, but don't know what to do about it. One young woman, maybe in her 20s, quietly asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, though I most certainly was not. My hip ached from standing so long. My eyes stung with tears I refused to let fall in front of these strangers, and the photograph of my father in my purse felt heavier than it had all morning. I want to tell you something important right now because I think it matters more than anything else in this story. In that moment, standing in that rope corral, I was not thinking about revenge. I was thinking about my father, and how he never got the chance I was being denied. I was thinking about the $5 and $10 bills that built that coffee tin over years of careful sacrifice. I was thinking that maybe, just maybe, the world had decided that women like me, old, plain, unimportant looking, simply did not belong in places like this. But I want you to remember something too. Something I have learned across 73 years on this earth. Being underestimated is not a weakness. It is the sharpest advantage you will ever be handed, if you're patient enough to let it work in your favor. While I stood there, a stadium official happened to walk by, an older gentleman doing his rounds, checking on staff and operations before the gates fully opened. He noticed me standing alone in that corral, an old woman in a homemade green dress with a cane, clearly distressed, and something made him stop. Maybe it was simple human decency. Maybe it was the enamel pin on my collar, the exact same design his own late father used to wear. He asked me what was wrong. I told him everything. My voice cracked more than once. I showed him my ticket. I told him about the coffee tin, about my father, about the 58 years. He listened to every word without interrupting me once, and when I finished, his face had changed completely. He asked to see my ticket again. He turned it over in his hand, studied it closely, and then he looked up at the young guard who had humiliated me and asked him a single question. Do you have any idea whose ticket this actually is? The guard shrugged and said he had no idea, that the woman just looked suspicious to him. What none of us in that moment fully understood, including me, was that my seat had been part of a special allocation. You see, months earlier, a charitable organization dedicated to honoring lifelong supporters of the sport had reached out to grassroots community centers around the world, quietly gifting a small number of specially marked tickets to elderly fans with decades of devotion to the game, verified through letters, photographs, and stories submitted by their families. My daughter, without telling me, had submitted an application on my behalf nearly a year earlier, along with an old photograph of me as a little girl sitting cross-legged in front of that tin television set. I never knew. She wanted it to be a surprise gift regardless of whether I won it, and when the notification came, she simply told me my ticket was ready, letting me believe I had purchased the whole thing myself with my coffee tin savings, because she knew I'd never accept charity if I thought that's what it was. That ticket wasn't just a ticket. It was marked quietly as an honored guest credential, one of only a handful in the entire stadium. The official's eyes went wide as he read the fine print on the back, print the young guard never bothered to check. He turned to his radio and called for stadium leadership immediately. Within minutes, a small group of stadium staff arrived at that little rope corral, and I watched their faces shift from confusion to something like reverence as they explained to me what my daughter had done, what this ticket truly meant, and where I would actually be sitting that day. Not the upper level, pitch side, in the section reserved for honored guests, with my name, my actual name, Patricia, displayed on a small plaque at my seat. I did not process it right away. I stood there in stunned silence while the young guard who had mocked me stared at the ground, his face burning red, his radio hanging limp in his hand. The official who had stopped to help me gently took my arm and asked if I was ready to be escorted to my seat. I looked at that guard one final time. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply said, "Thank you for teaching me something today. I hope you remember it the next time someone doesn't look the way you expect them to." And then I walked past him, past the very gate he had turned me away from, on the arm of a man in a stadium uniform, while the people who had watched my humiliation now watched something entirely different unfold. They walked me down, level by level, closer and closer to the pitch than I had ever imagined I'd get to stand. And when I finally reached my seat and saw my name on that little plaque, I sat down and wept. Not from anger. Not even from vindication. I wept because the little girl on the floor in front of that flickering black and white television had finally fully arrived. But the story doesn't end there. Word had begun to spread through the stadium staff about what had happened at that gate. An elderly woman, humiliated and turned away, revealed to be an honored guest with a story 58 years in the making. By the time the players walked out for warm-ups, a stadium camera operator, tipped off by one of the officials, turned a lens in my direction. My face appeared on the enormous stadium screen. Tears still drying on my cheeks, my husband's little enamel pin catching the light. And the crowd, 60,000 strangers who knew nothing about me an hour earlier, rose to their feet and applauded. I didn't understand at first. I turned around genuinely confused, wondering who they were cheering for behind me. It took my new friend from the stadium staff gently pointing at the screen, at my own face displayed 30 feet tall, for me to understand that they were cheering for me. I have never in my life heard a sound like that. 60,000 voices rising together. For an old woman in a green dress, she sewed herself. I covered my mouth with both hands and I sobbed like a child, and I didn't care one bit who saw me. The match itself was extraordinary. I won't bore you with every kick and every goal, because honestly by that point the football itself almost felt secondary to what I had already lived through that day. But I'll tell you this. I watched every single minute with my whole heart wide open, thinking of my father, thinking of my husband, thinking of that coffee tin on the top shelf of my kitchen cabinet that had finally truly done its job. Near the end of the match, a stadium official approached me again, this time with a young journalist trailing behind him, notebook in hand, asking if I'd be willing to share my story. I almost said no. I am not a woman who seeks attention. But then I thought about all the other old women out there, all the people who have been told in one way or another that they don't belong somewhere, that they don't look like they deserve to be there, and I thought maybe my story could remind someone that it isn't over, that dreams don't have an expiration date, that 58 years is not too long to wait for something that matters. So I said yes. That young guard, the one who turned me away, found me after the match ended. He waited by the exit, clearly nervous, and when I approached he apologized, really apologized, not the kind of apology people give because they're told to, but the kind that comes from genuine shame. He told me he'd never forget what he'd done, and that he hoped I could forgive him. I told him I already had, because holding on to anger at 73 years old is a luxury I simply don't have time for anymore. But I also told him something else. I told him that every single person he ever meets is carrying a story he knows nothing about, and that the next time someone doesn't look important to him, he should remember my green dress and my coffee tin and my 58 years of waiting. I flew home 3 days later, and when I walked through my front door, I went straight to my kitchen, climbed carefully onto a step stool, and took that old coffee tin down from the top shelf one final time. It was empty now, every dollar of it finally spent on the thing it was always meant for. I didn't put it back on the shelf. I set it on my mantle instead, right beside my husband's photograph, because it deserved to be seen, not hidden away. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry about how I was treated at that gate. I tell them the truth. I'm grateful for it. Because if that young man hadn't underestimated me, I never would have discovered what my daughter did for me in secret. I never would have heard 60,000 strangers rise to their feet for an old woman in a homemade dress. I never would have had the chance to look a man in the eye and teach him something about respect instead of screaming at him, which, believe me, 73-year-old knees or not, I was fully prepared to do if it came to that. If there's one thing I want you to carry with you after hearing my story, it's this. The world will often decide who you are before you've said a single word. They will look at your gray hair, your worn coat, your slow walk, your simple dress, and they will make assumptions about your worth. Let them underestimate you completely. Because the moment they realize how wrong they were is the moment you finally truly get to stand in your own light. I am 73 years old, and I sat pitchside at a World Cup match while 60,000 people applauded my name. My father never got that chance. My younger self never dared to dream it would actually happen. But it did. And if it happened for a seamstress with a coffee tin and a 58-year-old promise, It can happen for you too, whatever your own version of that stadium gate might be. Thank you for sitting with me through this story today. If it moved you even a little, I would be so grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe for more. And please tell me once more in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I truly do read every single one. Until next time, don't ever let anyone tell you that you don't belong where your heart has been waiting your whole life to stand.